Hi, and welcome to Personal Side of Business Podcast, where every business has a story. Today, I'd like to welcome Tiffany Deal Hecklinski Ph.D., the co-founder and COO of the Exalt Clinical Research, which combines clinical research trials and healthcare expertise. Hi, Tiffany, and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jet, thanks for having me today.
Yeah, no problem. So tell me, what does Exalt do?
So, we are a clinical research company and we test drugs and devices that are going through the FDA approval process. So, the FDA obviously has quite a specific process for how they get devices and drugs onto the market. And they have clinics like us that execute trials to make sure that these devices and drugs are safe to the public when they come on the market.
Are there a lot of stages to what you do could you explain that for listeners that don't know?
Sure, yeah. So there are four stages of the process. Obviously, phases one, two, three, and four. And by the time they get to even stage one, phase one, these have been they've been testing for a while. And so by the time they get to our clinic, we deal particularly with phases two, three, and four. They've been researched quite a bit. So by the time they get to our clinic, we're able to tell our subjects, these are the potential side effects. This is what we pretty much know is going to happen if you take this investigational product or use this device. A lot of times, what we see is that pharmaceutical companies are actually combining drugs that are already FDA approved to see how those drugs work on something else. So, for example, we work with sleep apnea. And so they may take a drug that's being used for ADHD and bladder incontinence, two drugs that are already FDA approved, and they put them together and use it to see how that affects people with sleep apnea. And so that has shown to work in the past. And so now they're looking at it and saying, okay, we need to take this through these different phases to get this approved for this indication. So even though they might be approved for ADHD, might be approved for bladder incontinence, we're going to show that it can be approved for obstructive sleep apnea.
Wow. Now, after you're done with those trials and research, what happens to all that information?
Yeah, so essentially, we don't analyze any of the data. We collect the data. I use a lot of sports metaphors. And so I look at it this way: the pharmaceutical companies are like the owners of a sports team.
Okay.
Okay. And then they have their coaches, and the coaches are what we call clinical research organizations. And the coaches are the ones that come up with the game plan or the protocol, which is going to be what we, the players, the clinical research, the actual clinic, we execute that game plan. So when a clinical research organization contracts us, we execute that game plan. And so we just collect all the data and give it right back to the clinical research organization and the pharmaceutical company. So we don't analyze any of it.
Okay.
We give it right back. With that being said, we do fall under the umbrella of HIPAA. And so we operate like any other medical clinic where, we obviously value patient and subject data and their privacy, that sort of thing. And in no way can our subjects, like, there's no connection between the pharmaceutical company, the CRO, and the subjects that come to our clinic.
Okay. And what is the process for that? Or do you l- request or look for projects you want to work on, or is it the other way around, or is it both, like in combination?
Yeah, it's kind of both. So we definitely have indications that we are experts in. Sleep is one of them. We also have so anything that has to do with sleep, like obstructive sleep apnea, insomnia, for example. But then we also do things in dermatology, like plaque psoriasis, for example. We're also going to branch into migraine and weight loss. And so it's something where we look for trials that are testing drugs and devices in those indications. But then also sometimes when you're successful, those CROs come to you as well and say, "Hey, you guys were
Mm.
one of the top enrollers in the country in this last sleep apnea trial. Can we do another one with you?" And so it's kind of both of that. Where we're looking for certain trials
Mm.
that we're interested in and that our doctors are interested in. So we have a doctor in particular who is a bariatric surgeon, and he is really interested in weight loss drugs. Not necessarily that if they work on weight loss, but what are the side effects of that? So we know with the GLP-1 inhibitors that yes, of course, you're going to lose weight, but what else is happening to your body? So he's really interested in us looking at trials and saying, like, okay, is there muscle loss? What's doing it to the GI tract? Could there be an issue with potentially blood sugar? So that's the kind of thing where I mean, there's a drug that's already FDA approved. It's just looking at it through a unique lens.
It's interesting. Now, what's a time frame? Like, is there an average time frame for a lot of these research studies, or um, does it become less if you're one of the experienced researchers in that field?
So it really is, I would say there are a couple different things that could impact the length of the trial. So first of all is whether it's a phase one, two, three, or four. A lot of times, as you go further out into these, like as you go, increase. So as you get to stage or phase three and phase four, the trials do become a bit longer, and you also need more subjects because by that point, they're getting close to the point where they're going to get FDA approval, right? So in those earlier phases, um, sometimes they're a little bit shorter than they are in the later phases. Also, it just depends on what the indication is. So, there are some indications that are definitely looking at long term effects. So, for example, when you're doing central nervous system research, CNS, looking at Alzheimer's, dementia, that sort of thing, those can be potentially very long trials, like years. Sometimes when we're looking at something like with obstructive sleep apnea, like right now, we have one and it's 4 weeks. And
Right.
so, yeah, so it really can just depend on the trial and what they're testing, what the endpoints are that they're looking for.
Oh, that's interesting. Um, could you explain to listeners how you started or how you got involved in this?
Yeah, so I've been in research for a while. After I graduated from college, I worked in higher education. So got my master's and started teaching in higher education. And so I've been around research from that lens for a long time. But in 2011, I was diagnosed with stage three colorectal cancer. And once I kind of had that behind me, had some chemotherapy and radiation and surgery, and had quite a journey there. I started to do some consulting work at the University of Michigan with their health system, and realized that there was really a whole nother side to research once you're in on that medical side. So I kind of had um, the psychosocial part of it, being a communication major, and looking at different communication theories and that sort of thing, and being published there. But then once I got to working in the health system, realized, wow, this is a whole nother level of research, and had the opportunity to work for a private clinical research company and really liked it. There's a lot less bureaucracy than
Yeah,
in
yeah.
higher education, which is which was nice. And also, it was neat to kind of be part of research that is going to help people. Obviously, I'm alive because of clinical research. I wouldn't be here if there weren't trials like what my company does right now. So it's personal
Yeah.
from that standpoint, but that's kind of how I got to be where I am right now.
It's always interesting, right? When I hear a lot of stories of people who either get into certain fields because of something personal that happened to
Hmm.
them. Um, do you think you would still be in higher education if th- that cancer didn't happen?
Yeah, 1,000%. I
Yeah.
totally would have been. Because it wasn't like I got out of teaching because I didn't like
Yeah.
it. It was just I didn't really know this was a thing.
Yeah.
Like I knew about the FDA approval process, and you knew that people had to go through trials to get, drugs approved. But I guess I didn't realize that you could actually own a clinic and execute those trials. And granted, we don't do cancer research, but the trials that we do make a difference in somebody's life. And I don't think I would have completely understood that process or the impact that can make unless I had, started doing consulting work at the University of Michigan.
And from that time where you started or you left higher education to the time where you
Mhm.
opened up Exalt, how long was that time period?
Yeah, so it was probably 7 to 8 years, and a lot of that had to do with I went back and got my PhD. So one of it was a wonderful experience, doing that consulting work. But learned very quickly that doctors like to work with other doctors, and so had an opportunity to go back and get my PhD in health communication from Indiana University at Indianapolis, and so that took a little bit of time. Have 3 children and moved around at the time a lot, and so that process of getting my doctorate took a few years, and so because I was we moved and
Yeah.
again, and you have kiddo stuff. But so it was about 7 years, and a lot of that had to do with I really wanted to get that PhD because I realized the element that it means doesn't mean I'm smarter than I was before. It essentially just meant I jumped through quite a bit of hoops and I was persistent,
Yeah.
stubborn. I think my children would call me and my mother. Um, but that was really more of what it was. I knew the importance of having that PhD, getting into business like this.
What were some of the hurdles outside of having to move your family around
Right.
on business side, and then we can come back to the sort of family side, how everyone dealt with that. But what were some of the, I guess, business hurdles or education hurdles you had to get through your PhD?
Yeah. So I think definitely, if somebody wants to get whether it's finish their 4 year degree or finish their master's or finish their PhD, I think a lot of it is just persistence and knowing that you do not have to be you know if you had me take a standardized test, um, I don't think I would score any better than anyone else. And so those letters after my name really, it's just because I worked hard and I didn't give up. And so I think that would be my best advice for someone going through this is to first of all, don't think that just because you have this perception of yourself that, oh, that person's so much smarter. Oh my gosh, there's no way. I didn't have a 4.0 in high school. I didn't have a 4.0 in college. I literally picked my degree as a communication major because I didn't want to take math.
Yeah.
So, but once I had to get to the level where I did have to take those classes, I just was like, I'm going to do this. And I was going to work hard and I was going to figure it out and I was going to ask for help. So that would be my best advice, or I guess what I think is um,
Something you had to push through. Yeah.
yeah, and because I think there are definitely people that I was in PhD school with that were incredibly so much smarter than I was, but some of them didn't make it,
Yeah.
and it had nothing to do that I was smarter than they were. It was just because I persevered. I think you ask anyone who has gotten a doctorate, like you get to the end and it literally is like you're lining up tabs on your table of contents. And like that's kind of where it is. And it's just about working hard and staying persistent with it. So I think with that education standpoint, it's just committing and just sticking with it and just not giving up and just not giving up. Um, as far as opening a business, I'm not from Southern California. I've lived all over the country, but not from here. And so I think one of the biggest barriers for me was just I didn't know a lot of people. And so it was getting out in the community and joining organizations where I could meet people and make connections with people who don't do know people. And I kind of feel like that's where I am right now, where I may not know someone, but I know people that know people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that really, to me, was a big barrier to overcome. But again, completely doable.
And what was the decision to come to Southern California? I don't know if I know that.
Yeah, so it was actually my husband's job. So
Okay.
he's a former college football coach.
Okay.
And so and then my dad was a college football coach and an NFL scout. So I've lived 29 places, and I don't count moving in the same city. So I've lived like four different places since moving here to San Diego in 2020, but I only count it as one
Yeah.
move. And so 29 individual places I've lived throughout
Wow.
my life. Yeah. So my husband took a job. We moved here from Kansas and moved here in 2020. So that was the impetus for the move here.
Now, can you explain that timeline? So when you were moving because of education purposes, what was going on with your kids and your husband at that time? Was he able to just pick up and go to? He was like, We're just going to do this," or was there like a separation in time? Like,
Yeah.
did you have to go? Okay, I'll follow you after the season's over. Whatever it is was going on.
Yeah. So yes to all of those
Okay,
things.
okay,
So most of it is the kids and I would follow.
okay.
That it was definitely and that's kind of how the coaching world works, where the coach takes the job, sometime like between Thanksgiving and February ish, and that's the college kind of
Mhm.
rotation, and then the spouse and the kids follow either immediately depending on the situation. I always worked, and so and again taught in higher education. So I usually had a contract that I had to finish throughout the semester. And then obviously as your kids get older, depending on what they're doing, you're trying to navigate that as well. So sometimes it was, you had to stay behind to sell the house, coordinate the move. Then you have to find a place at the new, wherever you're going, you have to find a new place to live and find schools and all that sort of thing. So it's definitely a balancing act. And it was sometimes different every single move. But there was definitely one time when we left Michigan and he took a job in Colorado. Our daughter had committed to play softball at Indiana
Wow.
University. And so that's a partial scholarship. It is
Yeah.
not full scholarships. So we actually moved to Indiana and we were close to family, the three kids and I did. And then he was in Colorado coaching, but so we could get her in-state tuition, and that's actually when I started my PhD. But with that being said, I moved one, two, three, four. We lived four places while I was getting my PhD. So
With all of this moving, do you guys try to set up completely in one place, or do you go, let's sort of get everything in place, and then with the thoughts, and maybe we have to do this again because of your husband's
right.
job, like
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, there are definitely moving stickers on our furniture and
okay,
it's kind of funny. Like sometimes I don't have time to take them off.
yeah,
And there are definitely boxes that I'm like, man, that box like has like seven moving stickers on it. Like I wonder what's in there. So you try to make it a home as much as you can each time you move. With that being said, there's definitely priorities. And so, obviously, I'm sure everyone can relate when you have children, right? Those of us that have children, you want to get them settled first. And so you try to get their room set up, and obviously, you have to have your kitchen set up. So your guest bedroom may not be like
It's got like
quite
a
as
futon.
fancy. Exactly.
It's got a futon and a painting on a wall.
Exactly. Maybe a
Yeah.
painting, maybe a painting. Um, but yeah, so you definitely have the priorities from there. And sometimes, we moved from Terre Haute, Indiana to Lawrence, Kansas to San Diego in 9 months.
Wow.
So yeah, so Lawrence, Kansas was definitely not a lot of stuff unpacked at
Wait,
that
what
place.
did you know? So what was why were you not fully settled? Did you know right away that you were gonna be like
No,
leaving?
because yeah, we didn't because again with with um with my children and the moving, like the time frame, we had moved to Kansas at the beginning of the summer. So my children had finished out the school year in Terre Haute, and by the time, we sold the house and moved, and then when we got to Kansas, it was the summer, and then I was busy like with my boys with baseball and training for football, right? Getting ready. And then, football season started. We were at the University of Kansas at the time. So you're not getting a lot of stuff unpacked during football season. And then he ended up getting the job here at San Diego State, like, gosh, I think like right around Christmas. So, it was really like, again, you just kind of had the bare essentials unpacked.
And when you guys are moving to different places and you're setting up, how what is that conversation like with for the kids? Like, are they have you guys have done it a lot? So
Right.
at this point, are they just like, yeah, we kind of get the whole moving,
We know
right?
the drill.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely how, and I think, again, those of us that are parents know this. Like when you present information to children, you can go at it one of two ways. You can either be like, oh my gosh, we are going on another adventure. We are so fortunate. Or you can be negative about it. And that's your choice as a parent. And everybody has to do what's best for them, but I always chose, or I tried to be positive, right? And there were times when it was hard, especially when I had a really good job that I loved, because I worked pretty much the whole time that we've done these travels, and it could be hard sometimes. But at the same time, I think that it definitely gave, and I know that's how my parents were when I was growing up, and every time we had to move. And so I always looked at it as an adventure. And even though I was sad, and I told my kids, you're allowed to be sad, but at the same time, like we have no idea what's in front of us, and this is going to be so great. And so just trying to be positive and upbeat that way. And then also looking at it and saying, just think like if we had never moved to this place, you would have never met these people. So I know it was sad to move before, but look at how great
yeah.
this was. Like, and then the next place is going to be just as great. And, you know, and the great thing with technology nowadays is that it's so much easier for kids to stay in touch with each other. Like back when I was,
Yeah.
I'm old. So it's like, we had to write letters, you
Yeah, and
know?
then those letters start to separate from like
Oh my
2 weeks
God.
to a month and a half, and then eventually it's like, oh, I'll see you hopefully in 8th grade and 12th grade,
Exactly.
and yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah, I've
so
had that too.
it's a lot easier now, and I think that's the thing that's so fun with all 3 of my kids. They have friends all over the country. Sometimes, when kids, move to other countries, like all over the world. And so it really is pretty cool.
That's awesome. And when you were sort of thinking about getting into clinical research,
Mhm.
did you know or did you think that you were going to have your own business, or you're just going to get involved somehow? And
Yeah.
just okay,
I didn't think
yeah,
that. I never would have thought myself as like an entrepreneur or a small business owner. And I think part of that is because I'm a fourth generation educator. Like my great grandma taught in a one-room schoolhouse in central Illinois. And my grandma was a teacher. My mom was a teacher. And my grandpa was a football coach. my dad's a football coach. I married a football coach. Like business was business.
Yeah.
Like people majored in marketing or finance, and I was like, oh, that's business. But I don't know what that is,
Yeah.
right? It's just like, again, this generic business thing. And so, no, I'm completely like was not on that path at all. And I was very fortunate to connect with my business partner now. She actually was the one that hired me at the first clinical research company that we worked at. And we just hit it off amazingly well. And, just decided that, she had always wanted to open up her own site. And I think because I had moved around so much, I was like, what the heck? Why not?
Yeah.
I've done all this other stuff. Let's do it. Um, and so probably I was a little bit naive, which I think is probably pretty common with
Yeah.
first time small business owners and entrepreneurs. But at the same time, there's kind of a blessing to that
Yeah.
because you don't know what you don't know. So now, looking back, I'm like, geez, that was kind of gutsy.
Yeah, I
Right.
think there's always these like sweet spots for uh, entrepreneurs and business owners in the beginning that it's either you just go all in and you're like,
Right.
whatever, if it works out, it works out, or you overthink it and it starts to scare you away, right? So
Hmm.
I think I've met very few people that are been in the middle. They're
Hmm.
usually just whatever happens. I got nothing to lose. I'm going to try to go after this dream. I'm hitting this age in my life. I want to do this. But then I've seen these people that have oh man, everyone's told me no, it's not going to work out, and then they end up never hitting or touching that dream in
Yeah.
any which way, right?
It's kind of like, what is it? Paralysis by
Yeah. Hmm.
analysis, right? And I think the other thing too is that because I went into business with a partner, and
Hmm.
again, that probably could have gone any of, one of two ways, right? Like that could have been very bad or very good. And she and I work very well together. Is it perfect? No, right? But it's perfect for us.
Yeah.
Um, and part of that is because we complement each other. She's been in clinical research for 30 years. Whereas I bring more of like a communication, community service based background to things, right? Being an educator. And she was definitely like she had run, clinical research companies or clinical clinics for larger organizations. And so she knew kind of the nuts and bolts of setting up a clinic. Whereas she was like, go into the community and make friends and let's build this business together. So we complement each other very well in that way. I love being with the subjects and interacting with them, but I can do that and be confident in that because I know that she's doing the books and
Yeah.
she's doing a lot of the data driven things that we need to do, just on a day to day business part that I don't have to worry about. And I think she feels confident knowing, like, okay, Tiffany's got that part of the business taken care of. So when I do more of the clinical operations side, she definitely does the admin part.
That's great. And how, could you explain some of the ways that, or just one incident maybe you think of that you had to deal with each other in a way that it was like, oh, this is sort of uncomfortable, and you're like, now, okay, since we have this relationship, we can just get through it. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I think, we actually just went through something right now where, we're starting a new study. We're launching it. And it was a study that she had kind of been in charge of and was seeing the subjects and that sort of thing. And this is a time right now, right? It's tax season, and we have a couple other studies going on, and we really needed this focus on numbers and finances and money and all of that stuff. And essentially, we sat down and we were like, okay, we have this study starting. And I know that you had kind of been in charge of it before, but this is where we need you to be. And it was definitely one of those things that we had to talk through. to be like, okay, how are we going to navigate this, and what are each other's strengths and what we can do? Because it's like, okay, Dixie, her name's Dixie. This is what you do
Yeah.
for the company, and then this is what I do. And so even though we had kind of, and I think like any small business owner knows, right? We all wear a bunch of hats. Um, but it was definitely a hat that we were like, okay, we definitely know finances are not Tiffany's hat. So
Right.
let's
She took
let's
communications.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So let's make sure Dixie has
Yeah.
that hat on squarely on her. And then, I definitely do more of the interaction with the subjects and the patients and that sort of thing.
And then over time, have you guys started to kind of expand your strength and weaknesses? Like, have you started getting into the financial side a little bit just out of sheer necessity to be involved with the business?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think she's gotten into the operations
Yeah, yeah,
side
yeah.
because of that as well. And so yeah, I think again, when you're small and when you have we're growing, but we've only been in business a year and a half, and we are growing. We're making a profit, which is huge, I
Yeah,
think, in
especially in the
any
first couple of
business,
years. Yeah.
right? But with that being said, we're wearing a lot of hats. We're working a lot of hours. And learning that just it may not be something that you love. Like, I'm not going to choose to sit down and look at a spreadsheet. Like, that is not
Yeah.
enjoyable
Yeah.
for me.
Right.
But I do understand, but it's kind of like going to PhD school.
Yeah.
I understand the importance of it and I understand the necessity of it. And so and I want to learn. And I think that's the other piece of this is I love learning. And I love learning something new every day and knowing that I get to go into this business learning with these group of people that I love, right? Is just a really cool thing. Um and sometimes I learn like that I don't like it, but it's also I learned something.
And do you guys talk like is there a roadmap for the next couple years, or because of everything happening so quickly, is it like, okay, we're gonna sort of take it month by month for now and then start to reassess maybe in 6 months or whatever it is? Could you kind of explain your process for trying to see where you're gonna be in 5 years, 10 years?
Right. Yeah, and I think, and again, I do very well with fuzzy and I do very well with cloudy. And a lot of that is just because of how I grew up. So we definitely do have a map of where we see ourselves, a pipeline of studies that come in that we project that we will do, that we'll get awarded, that we'll execute. But at the same time, knowing that we may have to pivot and that a study like we today, there was a study that we thought was going to start in February and it's not going to start till July. So it's knowing that you may have to pivot with some of these things. And I think for some people that can be really hard. Because again, sometimes you're trying to make something black and white that's
Yeah.
gray. And I do very well with gray, but not everybody's like that. And so when you're somebody that can deal with that, sometimes it can be hard when other people aren't like you. And I think that has been definitely a challenge just being a business owner as well, knowing that there could be some members of your staff that are like, look, I want to know what I do and I want to have a very specific job description. And I want to know exactly what you expect out of me every single day and every week and every month. And sometimes as a business owner, you're like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, it's like it changes, right? And especially when it's like, well, today I may need you to make recruiting calls, but tomorrow you may have to
Yeah.
make an ad and figure out, how to put it on like Google
Yeah.
Ads. And so that's I think kind of the challenging part of this is making sure that how you are knowing that like again you can have this
Right.
roadmap but also that there could be definitely places where you have to
Right.
pivot.
I've always thought of being a business owner as like being the captain of a ship,
Hmm.
right? Like you got to get from one landmass to another, but in between, there's waves, there's climate, there's
Yeah.
things that happen to the boat, and then everyone. If everyone on there were to think that they had one specific job only,
Hmm.
and then something happens, someone gets sick, there's no food on there. What starts to happen, right? We start to have to try to figure out something. So I totally relate to that, and I think that's a great analysis of like what happens in a business. And I think starting to wrap it up, like what do you think if someone were to get into your field? Um, what do you think would be some of the first steps that they would advise them to do?
I would definitely have somebody, if somebody wants to open a clinical research company, I would definitely have them either they visit
Mhm.
a site, or they have someone that has experience with that. I think this would be a very challenging thing to do without any knowledge of how the clinical research process works. Because even though my business partner and I have, a lot of experience, particularly with clinical research, me with research in general, um, it's hard. It's hard and it's a lot of work. So I think having talks with someone that already owns a site would be wonderful. But I also think it's important, regardless of what you go into, is to have conversations with other small business owners because there are so many similarities between small business owners, regardless of what you do. Like, it doesn't matter if me as a clinical researcher talks to somebody who owns a restaurant. Obviously, there are differences, but a lot of times we're dealing with the same thing. We're dealing with, okay, how do we bring people in the door? We're dealing with, okay, how do our team members work together? We're dealing with, what am I saying as a leader? What's the culture of my company? What do I want it to be like? And like you said, how every single member of your team impacts somebody else and something else. Like, there's no silos,
Yeah.
right? Just like that analogy, the boat is right on. Like, it doesn't matter what you do, it's going to impact somebody else. And so I think if somebody wanted to get into clinical research or just open any small business in general, I would definitely have a lot of conversations with a lot of other small business owners.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Tiffany, for being on the podcast. If people wanted to find out about Exalt, where can they look you up?
Great. Yeah. So obviously, we're on social media. I'm also on LinkedIn. But our website is exalt, EXALT, research.com. And then I'm on LinkedIn and all the social medias through our website, and then just me, myself as well.
All right. Thank you so much, Tiffany.
Thanks, Jet.
Have a good day.